We got Gators Breakdown here. We know we're business.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go with this kind of quick recruiting update. Gators with another commitment, 3 in 3 days right here for the Gators this time. Offensive lineman Daniel Pierre Louis, and recruiting streak continues here for the Gators off the heels of the 27-16 win over LSU. These guys on campus this past weekend, and it's paying off for the Gators in these commitments. I'm David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Well, this is going to be a kind of quick update. I'm going to tag this, put this on the part of the last episode we did where we dove into the commitments of Trell Jones and Stefan Shivers as well. So this would be the recruiting part of that episode, and this update right here would Pierre Louis committing to the Gators. So plenty to get into. Finally good to talk about some recruiting here. So we'll get into Pierre Louis, a flip from Florida State. So that's the big news right there for this one as their class falls apart. But everybody hit that like button, subscribe right here on Gators Breakdown for this quick recruiting update, and continue to bring you guys some good stuff here. Check out the last episode of Gators Breakdown. Hadn't even been up 24 hours yet there, but a lot of good discussion. One of the longest episodes we've done in quite a while. And then join Gators Breakdown Plus. Link is in the description. You can keep the conversation going on. There's a recruiting channel there. If you just want to talk some recruiting, there you go. You got that. You get those ad-free episodes of Gators Breakdown as well. All right, so let's get into it. Gator Nation, we got to commit. And this is Daniel Pierre Louis, measured in 6'4", 332 pounds this past weekend there in Gainesville. And he was measuring at 290 before. That's where the recruiting services have it. But there was some updates this past weekend there. So interior offensive lineman from Loxahatchee, Florida, 24/7 Sports Composite ranks him the 972nd overall player and the 65th ranked interior offensive lineman. The On3 industry rankings rank him 949th overall and the 77th interior offensive lineman. As I mentioned earlier, very noteworthy because he is a flip from rival Florida State as their class continues to lose players and fall apart. Pierre Louis had been committed to the Seminoles for about a month since October 15th. With Alex Atkins no longer on staff there at Florida State, this one opened up even more for Pierre Louis. Like FSU growing up, but still with all the happenings there at FSU and the losing there, took a visit to Gainesville and commit to the Gators. Florida, South Carolina was coming in late with offers. Looked like Florida State was going to be the team to beat, but nope. We know the happenings going on there. So visited Gainesville this past weekend, as I mentioned, for the win over LSU and saw what he needed to see. He becomes Florida's lone offensive line commitment right now and the 15th commitment overall. Offensive line coach John DeCoster has been the main contact here. Mentioned they have a unique bond. He said, quote, obviously the connection is there, and I believe he is a good coach, and he is passionate about the offense, about the offensive line. He's also Haitian, so we got that connection. He gives good feedback on how to improve and how to get better, which I appreciate. He connects with me well, and he shows me the development that he's done with other players like me. Overall, we just got a good relationship, says Pierre Louis. So pull up some highlights right here. Here we go. Lines up at tackle. As you can see him playing a lot of left tackle in these highlights. So maybe some position versatility here, but the plan is for Florida to use him on the interior. And see him in gap scheme, pulling in a lot of these clips. And hopefully we'll get to it some here as well. But in pass blocking sets, shows a mean streak. He's not just holding his own. He's punishing guys. He's pushing them down the field, pushing them out of bounds. Plenty of pancake blocks to go along here in these highlights. It shows pretty good athleticism and movement. Shows good hands and pass protection. But you certainly could see what he does in getting – he goes with double teams and gets to the second level, gets to the third level. Always looking for the action. Always looking for somebody to hit here. And so it's definitely what you like. Certainly towers over everybody in these highlights a bit, but shows the athleticism where he can pull. I mean, pancakes, falls on guys. I mean, he's got a mean streak. In a lot of these highlights, something you like to see. Certainly, as I mentioned, has put on some weight recently, measuring there at Florida over now. What I say, 330 pounds now in what he's measuring out. So adding a good bit of weight. We'll see as, look, we're late in the cycle anyway, but how much that helps him in the end. But certainly a good pickup to get over Florida State. But there you go. I mean, you see engaging in a double team right away, gets to the second level, looking for somebody else to hit. Certainly developmental project here for the Gators. You'd like to start, raking up some of the 4-star, 5-star offensive linemen, and hopefully those are down the road. You'll hear that in the conversation we're showing from the last episode of Gators Breakdown. But got to get the numbers on the offensive line, got to get them back up. We'll see how the development goes, and who's on staff as well in the coming weeks, coming months. But there you go. And there's a look at Daniel Pierre-Louis, flipped from Florida State, and now committing to the Florida Gators. So that now puts the Gators up ranked 28th on the 24/7 Sports Composite. 15 commitments, of course. So even more on recruiting coming up right here to close out this episode. We're going to go back to the last episode of Gators Breakdown, talk about the commitments of Trell Jones, the quarterback from Mandarin, Stefan Shivers, defensive lineman that recently decommitted from Georgia, and more on recruiting. Here you go. Let's check it out. So let's continue with Billy Napier. And hey, look, second week in a row, he's talking about recruiting during the season. It can happen. It can happen. So here's Billy Napier on recruiting, like going back to just how big of a weekend this was. Florida, LSU, ton of recruits right here in the Swamp.
What type of weekend does that do for recruiting momentum, and what do you feel like that could carry into this last few weeks?
Yeah, winning helps recruiting. That's what I would tell you. So I think for us, that game day environment, seeing players produce, seeing players improve, I think it just it's a final piece of your product. I think we've worked on all the other parts of the player experience here. I think it's second to none. And I think seeing players improve and develop and grow into guys that can be some of the better players in the country at their position and have future NFL careers, that's important. Winning's important. And then just having a seat in that swamp when it's on fire like it was Saturday night, I think that's important as well.
Lo and behold, winning matters. Surprise, surprise. I'm glad to hear the head man say that, because everybody will say, recruiting's nothing but money now. No, wins and losses still matter. And when you're in that environment, as we have all discussed so far, what an exciting environment that was Saturday night, it paid off. But look, I talked about it on the game recap there, and we'll get into some recruiting news here and the guys that were there. But especially with DJ Lagway at quarterback and you're a wide receiver, how is it hard? It's got to be hard not to imagine yourself on the receiving ends of all those deep balls that are getting thrown by DJ Lagway. So, it's certainly being in an environment like that, winning some ball games, it's going to pay off in recruiting.
Yeah, look, I think we talk all the time, Dave, that recruiting's about hope, and DJ Lagway provides hope. And you sit there and you look at it, you talked about him imagining him throwing you the ball. And you go, yeah, or even imagining being on the defensive side of the ball where you don't have to be perfect all the time and you still have the ability to potentially stay in a ball game. You can make some mistakes and the quarterback's going to help you out on the other side. You're looking at a guy who if things fall right, it's going to get a statue out front. And, I think that's probably a little bit of hyperbole, but it's kind of, I imagine where Tennessee fans were when Peyton Manning came in there his first year. And certainly he didn't get a statue, but that's because Florida kept beating them. And so they still have to get a lot of the work done on the field, but you can see a path. And so to me, if he wins this game with Graham Mertz, or if he wins this game with Aiden Warner, maybe with Warner, I'm feeling a little bit differently. But if he wins this game with Warner or Mertz, I'm not saying it's the biggest game of his career. The reason I'm saying it's the biggest game of his career is that the hope that was promised in the DJ Lagway commitment just delivered, which means now there's hope for the future moving forward. And if I'm somebody who looks at it, it's not the win that makes me come. Now, I mean, I was there. It was electric to see a fan base that supports a 4-5 team in that way. Is something where you go, okay, I've heard about the toxicity of this fan base, but man, if we turn this around, like if this win against LSU is making them go 10-0, like how much of a madhouse is that place, right? And you can start to imagine that, and you can start to think about what that means. And so to me, that's the recruiting pitch. The recruiting pitch is not in these words, but we suck. And look, they still show up. And now we've got hope that we're not going to suck next year and come over here and help us turn this around. You don't want to go to Alabama. They lose 2 games and everybody gets upset. Like everybody goes nuts. You lose 2 games here next year, you're going to be a legend. It's like we're going to welcome you back to the swamp 20 years later to celebrate the turnaround in the playoff appearance, because if Florida goes 10-2 against their next year's schedule, they're playing in the playoff. So, that there is a sales opportunity within all of this that I hope Napier doesn't miss, because along with the NIL stuff, along with the revenue sharing stuff that we were talking about earlier, Lagway is an edge, like not just because of the quarterbacks that are coming back, but because anyone who's played the game understands that when there's a guy who's special under center, everything is different. And so, if Graham Mertz wins this game against LSU, it doesn't tell us where the program's headed. It tells us where the program is at this very moment. Instead, what this tells us is this is where the program is at this moment, and it's a snapshot of where it can be. And people can start dreaming about where it can be, which is why if I'm a recruit, I'm reconsidering Florida, and it sounds like a bunch of people are.
You want to add anything there, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as recruiting's changed, as we talk about the money side of things, it's not dissimilar to sometimes with the NFL, right? Where there's that quarterback, that leader that guys want to come play with, and they can attract folks to come play with them. So there is still the money component, but there is that aspect of, is that guy special? Can I play with him? And I think right now that's what we have is a situation where that's why this momentum is so important. It's like what you're talking about, Will. If you can keep the momentum going, if you can keep showing off DJ Lagway as the next potential superstar in college football, and they play well next week and they play well the following week, and you can get to a bowl and play well again on national TV, all of a sudden a lot of folks are going to start noticing. And that's when recruiting, you really do, whether it's the money, whether it's the attention to detail that it does seem like the Napier regime has had, at least dealing with recruits. All of a sudden all that can kind of pull together, and hopefully you can pull together salvage a class, both with high school and then also in the portal.
All right, guys. Well, coming out of Saturday, Florida on Sunday, and here on Monday, get some commitments. So let's get into that. And we'll start with right here in Jacksonville, Trell Jones, Mandarin quarterback, committing to the Gators right down the road from me right here. So 6 foot, 195-pound, 4-star quarterback, 237 overall in the 24/7 Sports Composite, 21st quarterback in the country there. On 3 industry rankings, very similar, as they have Jones 248 overall, 21st quarterback in the country. How it breaks down here is pretty interesting. Both 24/7 and On3's own rankings have Jones as a 3-star, but he's boosted up by ESPN and Rivals, having him as a 4-star prospect on both those services. Rivals lists Jones as a 36th player in the country. So let you know the variance that's out here in the recruiting services here. And they have him as the 4th-ranked quarterback in the country. He decommitted from Florida State last week. This was pretty much a flip. That was a foregone conclusion that a commitment to Florida was coming up after visiting this past weekend for the LSU game. The flirtation had been there for quite some time, thinking this could happen back all the way in the spring. As some public visits to Gainesville, some private visits to Gainesville as well. All those happened. And then take into account the terrible season from Florida State. And here we are with Trell Jones. So I'll pop up some highlights as we keep on discussing him here. In 2024, this season, Mandarin season just ended last weekend, but he wasn't on the field. He missed all but 2 games this past senior season for him, lower leg injury. He was 2-0 in those 2 games, completed 19 of 21 passes and 90.5% of their 439 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. In 2023, last season, helped power Mandarin to an 11-4 record, and the Sunshine State 4M championship game completed 183 of 302 passes. That was 60.6%. 3,195 yards, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Also ran for 132 yards and a touchdown. Became the first 3,000-yard passer in the Gateway Conference since Georgia quarterback Carson Beck, who was also at Mandarin there in 2018. In 2022, led the Mustangs to a 5-5 record, 161 of 277, about 2,300 yards, 23 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. And in 2021, interestingly enough, won the starting job as a freshman at Mandarin, 4-4 record after missing 2 games due to injury, 88 of 160, 55%, 1,253 yards, 14 touchdowns, 5 interceptions as a freshman there at Mandarin. So Andrew Ivins of 24/7 Sports says, an experienced signal caller with cleaner mechanics that has improved in every key statistical category since earning the starting nod as a freshman on varsity. More of a one-read passer at this stage that will feed his playmakers and throw them open. Gets the ball out quick with a compact, repeatable motion, tends to utilize more touch than he does velocity. Will keep his eyes down the field, hunt for the big play. Feet can get a little happy, especially when the interior rush starts building. Has to get better at protecting the football. Lost 11 fumbles the past 2 years. And cut down on the high-risk throws as the margins will be much smaller on Saturdays. Should be viewed as a potential starter at the Power 4 level that can move the chains with accuracy and anticipation. Mid-size frame isn't ideal, but can impress with his IQ and work ethic in various settings. So one interesting angle to this, guys, is you got to give him a lot of credit for wanting to come in here the year after DJ Lagway. What we see from Lagway on the field, where it can be tough to get a quality quarterback to come behind the superstar.
Yeah, I mean, I think we always talk about recruiting is about stacking. And when you got a guy like Lagway there, it's like you mentioned, Dave, it's hard to get people to come in afterwards. So certainly says something about his moxie, says something about what he's looking for in terms of his development. I think what you read, though, is the profile. Look, his ranking and all that sort of stuff are pretty similar to where Anthony Richardson was ranked. But I think the profile is one of a more polished guy than Richardson was, with less physical skills. But the other reality is that there's not a whole lot of DJ Lagways out there. Like go through the entire college football landscape and tell me which guys are changing programs as true freshmen this year. And that's a very short list, if not a list of one. And so when we look at quarterback prospects, especially, we have to make sure that we're at least keeping that in account, is that, yes, I would love for every recruit that comes to Florida to be DJ Lagway, but that's an unreasonable ask. And as we've seen this year, having guys in the 3rd, 4th, 5th position who are effective signal callers is critical, even if they're not as good as your starter. And so stacking those guys behind, like I think I made it sort of a snarky comment earlier this fall about, sure would be nice to have Austin Simmons or Jaden Rashada back there going into the Georgia or coming out of the Georgia game and after the Texas game. And so if nothing else, this is somebody who can provide depth to Florida overall. But the other thing is that you don't want to miss a year where you don't have a quarterback, because DJ Lagway ain't going to be here forever. And so when Lagway leaves, you want some guys who've gotten some experience, gotten some snaps, because if you try to live starting true freshmen at quarterback, even ones with profiles of Lagway, you're going to miss sometimes. And when you do, everything's going to go to hell. And we've seen what happened to Florida State this year with Jordan Travis gone, and they didn't have a plan to replace him at quarterback, at least not a very good one. And Florida State's just fallen apart. And so this is a part of putting together a chain of people, not just to be there in case Lagway gets injured, but also part of a succession plan. And you need to do that year after year. It's not good to skip one.
The other thing you think about too is you got to get some leaders in this recruiting class. And so getting a quarterback in there, getting somebody who is good friends with maybe some guys that we're looking to potentially look at, whether it's Solomon Thomas, whether it's maybe it's Jamie French, and honestly Vernell Brown III, who he's played on that 7-on-7 football team. But getting some guys who can create a core around, that's such a key thing. And so getting a quarterback in there that can at least be on those threads, recruiting, that's a key thing in trying to at least pull this recruiting class together here on quick notice.
Absolutely, great point there, and we will get into some of those names with that thought in mind of Jones coming in. He wasn't the only commitment that came out of this weekend, of course, and that's this past weekend, of course. Now the Gators have another one, and Stefan Shivers, defensive lineman. He was on campus this past weekend, committed to the Gators earlier on this Monday. 6'4.5", 385-pound, 3-star prospect out of Brentwood, Tennessee. Comes in as the 489th overall player, 52nd ranked defensive lineman in the country on the 24/7 Sports Composite. The On3 industry rankings rank him the 449th player overall and the 41st defensive lineman. Had some highlights for him too. So let me get them up. Man, this is live production at its best or at its worst. You guys tell me. But a lot moving on here, of course. But I gotta pause it because guys, you're gonna be blown away by this first highlight here.
You have him as a running back? I saw it earlier.
As a running back, it is the very first highlight that they put on here, which is what they should do. That's ridiculous. And boom, there we go. So you can see he's in the backfield. That is not hard to miss. So if you're watching the YouTube version, there you go. But this first highlight that's scary. I mean, if I'm 16 years old and I got that guy running at me, I am olaying you. You can run right by me. I do not care.
You're making some business decisions, Dave.
That looks like Caleb Banks running at my max. That safety looked like he was 9 years old.
Absolutely, I'm making some business decisions as a 16-year-old. Recently decommitted from Georgia here. Did Shivers, and Gators are recruiting Shivers to play nose in the 3 technique on the defensive line. Likes the way Florida uses Des Watson up front. Massive man that can plug the middle here. Run well. Shows a set of athleticism to make some plays in the backfield. Only stats I couldn't find anything from this year. But in 2023, last year, two-way player getting snaps at defensive line, offensive tackle, and as we saw, running back. He totaled 90 tackles. He had 20 tackles for loss, 11 sacks per the Jackson Sun, and, of course, just ridiculous playing running back. So, I mean, that was like a 60-yard touchdown run that he had there. Two-sport athlete at Brentwood Academy where he plays basketball as well. So, his previous head coach, Hayden Williams, told On3 back in the spring, quote, just seeing the kid, his size, his quickness, the speed he plays with, he's just a different animal. He's a special kid. Not a lot of 350-pound kids that move that well. It's really as simple as that. His biggest thing for me is his initial quickness. That first step is an elite first step. Off the ball, it's quick as can be, 6'5", 350, so you don't usually see first steps like he has. So that's probably 1A. 1B, his size. He's massive, especially in the interior of that defensive line. He's a good run stopper, but the quickness in the first step really helps him in the pass rush game as well. So I could see him being a 3-down defensive lineman instead of a specialist here or there, in the quote. So, and going back when he committed to Georgia, 24/7 Sports, Benjamin Wolk, quote said, I had the chance to see Shivers for the first time at the All-American Bowl Combine in San Antonio at the beginning of the year. His listing varies depending on where you look, but I'm told recently verified 6'4", 355. Does it take a genius to realize that prototype doesn't grow on trees? There are a select few people who have the ability to play zero tech in Georgia's defense on an annual basis, and Shiver is certainly one of them. This is a guy who wows people with his reaction time at the line of scrimmage as much as his sheer size. Shivers is probably someone who could play 1 tech out of the 3 tech if asked, but given his skill set, you'll get a lot of Jordan Davis comps in terms of how the Bulldogs are likely to use him. And then back in April, Tom Loy had this to say about Shivers at the Under Armour camp in Nashville. With him being committed to Georgia at the time, it was clear the 6'3", 355-pounder from the class of 2025 was no slouch. After watching him work Sunday, it was clear why the Bulldogs pushed so hard for the high school standout. He was powerful, ragdolled offensive lineman at times, still learning the position, but his strength and quick burst can't be taught. There weren't any offensive linemen that could truly stop him. There you go. Shivers joins Jalen Wiggins, Jeremiah McLeod as the players up front for the Gators defense in this class right now. And, of course, hopefully plug that middle in the coming years. We just talked about Caleb Banks. We just talked about that group and what they were able to do Saturday. Certainly adding a big, massive option here.
So anytime you can steal a guy from Georgia, I'm for it. That's certainly.
They'll say he was processed.
That's sort of sure he was. He wasn't a take. Like I remember those days when a guy wasn't a take because you had scholarship limitations. And all
I'm sure his recruiting score dropped a couple points after he left Georgia.
Well, I'll tell you right now. I'm looking at that tape, going, "How is that guy a 3-star?"
Yeah.
And then the other thing that jumps to mind is next year against Tennessee, if we have 4th and inches with Lagway and that guy in the backfield, there should be no end arounds. Like refrigerator Perry, that thing, man. It's 4th and inches, just absolutely destroy the defense. Look, obviously I'm in amongst boys there. The level of competition, I'm going to assume, given the size of some of those guys that he was throwing around like rag dolls, is relatively low where he's playing. But I mean, Brentwood Academy isn't like,
he just transferred there, by the way, this year.
So we'll see some of those highlights as it comes. But I mean, like there's some scary vision in some of those runs where you see him like make a cut to the outside when the defender crashes and you go, huh, well, that's interesting. And I do wonder whether that kind of vision translates when you move a guy either to the offensive or defensive line and say, okay, is this guy going to understand, because he's played running back, the gap discipline should be something that comes pretty easy. Whereas I think oftentimes the guys who are more athletic, their first instinct is to sort of jump out of the gap because they're trying to make a play. Because in high school, that works. And in college, the 350-pounder across from you just goes, all right, you want to jump out of the gap? I'll continue pushing you that way. And all of a sudden there's a giant hole. Now, I mean, look, I think when you're talking about the 489th ranked guy in the country, this isn't somebody that we should probably expect to make an impact in 2025. It's somebody that you're really sort of planning to make an impact down the road. But it's cool to see that film because there's obviously a lot of potential there. And whenever Georgia wants somebody and Florida gets them, that makes me happy.
100%. I'll say if the SEC is a line of scrimmage league, you can get size anywhere you can get size and add to some of that depth. It's important. So now it's a, who knows kind of where an 18-year-old ends up, but ultimately, like you said, well, he's big. Maybe they can put him in that Jack Pyburn position that they had him at that fullback running some of those plays. You definitely wouldn't want to see him coming that way, but if you can get some size on the defensive line, they've hit on some guys here in recent years too. Michael Burrow has had a really good year this year, kind of showing up here as a freshman who's kind of ranked similarly. So hopefully probably more of a project, but you never know.
Hey, there ain't many 6'5", 385s out
teach
there. Hey, guys, with these two commitments now, Florida up to 31st in the country on the 24/7 Sports Composite. Certainly much better than what it was looking like just a week ago. 14 commitments right now, about 3 weeks till early signing day. So, of course, rounding out that, hopefully, let's get into some targets and we'll sign off right here on this episode of Gators Breakdown. But, of course, Jamie French, Trell Jones, teammate here at Mandarin in Jacksonville, 5-star wide receiver, currently committed to Texas. Florida's chances with French seem to be improving. We'll see where this goes with some in Gainesville. So they think they have a shot. Impressed by DJ Lagway's performance in the win over LSU. Likes to playing with the idea of possibly playing with his teammate Jones in college as well. Florida feeling better about their chances, but still a lot of work to do. Has come out and said, and I was told this last week as well, here in Jacksonville, a lot of people wondered what that announcement for Billy Napier and that vote of confidence was going to produce. I told it had some ramifications in that Mandarin locker room. So it certainly seemed to play out that way. He even admitted that the clarity on Napier's future and the Lagway presence are really helping Florida's case here. Another 5-star receiver, Dallas Wilson, currently committed to Oregon. And, of course, he had a good unofficial visit to Florida. And, look, guys, he just set an official visit to come back next week for this coming up week for the Ole Miss game. Also impressed by DJ Lagway's performance. The thought there is distance from home becoming a factor. So, maybe that helps for him as well. Could benefit Florida. says Florida's currently sitting in the number 2 spot. Let's go back to Jacksonville. 5-star interior offensive lineman Solomon Thomas. They're at Raines High School. Still committed to FSU. Visited Florida this past weekend. Good visit, he says. Florida, LSU, FSU, main contenders right now. NIL, very important here in this one. Is impressed with Florida's improved offensive line performance. And look, that is a group that has certainly gotten better as this season has come along. Early playing time a factor as well. Another offensive lineman to look out for, maybe on commit watch, Daniel Pierre Louis, currently committed to FSU. Visited Florida for an official visit this past weekend. Strong relationship with offensive line coach John DeCoster. Florida, I think, in great shape here. A 24/7 Sports crystal ball pick has been logged there for him. Joseph Mbachu, 4-star defensive lineman from Grayson, Georgia, is a former Florida commit, decommitted, but now reconsidering the Gators, noticing Florida's improved defensive performance, and Napier's job security helped there as well. Had a recent visit to Florida and Texas. That's the 2 schools generating the most buzz. One of my top targets right here, seems like Florida keeps chipping away and making a move here. 4-star offensive lineman Tavares Dice, committed to Auburn, unofficially visited Florida this past weekend. Florida long viewed as competition with Auburn here. Florida has a shot. Some think more than others, so we'll see where this one goes. A marathon race going down to the wire. May visit Auburn this coming up weekend. That's about the highlights there. Naeem offered another Ohio State cornerback commit. He's a 5-star. He visited Florida. Not sure that one really plays out for Florida. I think that one's probably the longest shot out of most of these here. But no surprise, as we kind of already alluded to, guys, the performance of DJ Lagway, the vote of confidence for Billy Napier, hopefully pays off.
Yeah, I think this is going to be interesting to see. So in terms of 2025, the 5-star guys are the guys that you watch out for, right? So Wilson, Thomas, and French are the 3 guys that you go, those are the guys who are going to have an impact on the field to start with. Maybe you get some top 100 guys who could potentially do that as well. But think about like Napier's first class, and that first year it was Etienne and Shamar James who were adding something to the fold. And so, I get the stability of a year for Napier impacting these guys' decisions, but I think in terms of who's actually going to help in 2025, this has always been my concern, is there's sort of a moral hazard in terms of leaning towards the portal rather than high school recruiting. So if they're bringing in 5-star guys, then and then they go raid the portal. Well, now you've built up the program for short and long-term success. And regardless of what happens with Billy Napier after 2025, you haven't skipped the recruiting class, which I think is a valuable thing. So, so to me, those are the guys I'm looking at specifically. I'm looking at Wilson, Thomas, and French, and maybe not all 3 of them, but if Florida can get 2 of those 3 combined with Vernell Brown, the 3rd, and Ben Hanks, all of a sudden now you're talking about a class that's probably like, I don't know, 11th, 12th, somewhere in that range, at least an average player ranking. Maybe they don't get up there just because the volume isn't as high as it has been in the past. But, this has always been the case, is that Florida's recruiting class, even when it was 51st, it was not hideous in terms of the player quality. It's just there weren't many players in the class. So a team like, NC State had 21 commits and was in front of Florida. So each time Florida gets a commit, they jump from 51st to 34th. And so the next time they get a commit, they'll go from, 31st right now to 23rd. And we'll be looking at a class that's sitting in the 16, 17 range if they don't get any of those 5 stars. If they get 1 5-star, they're probably in the 14, 15 range. They get 2 5 stars, they're knocking on the top 10. And if they pull in all 3, well, now you got 4 or 5 stars in the class. Now you're talking about you're going to jump a bunch of folks there, and maybe you even end up in like the top 6, top 7, which would be a major coup considering where Florida's been. But what that would require is signing a quality of player much, much higher than they have gotten to commit thus far. And so that'll be the question. I think this sort of goes to the whole point of the first half of the episode here. We were talking to Dave about what Florida is set up to do. And, you mentioned Thomas being an NIL, like that being heavy. Look, that's a consideration for every one of these guys.
I was about to say he's really not the only one, but it was pointed out in some of his post interviews. So.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I think the point though is that NIL is a consideration for all these guys. If the money's equivalent, then they're going to make decisions on something else.
Correct.
And I think Florida's job specifically with these 5-star guys is to provide all that something else and then make sure the money's not equivalent. because I would rather have the 3 5-stars and then no depth beneath it than all the depth beneath it and none of the 5-stars. I think there's ample evidence that you top load the class as best you can. And so, if it takes all 20.5 million or whatever that revenue share is to bring in those 3 guys, do it.
Yeah. Dave, a lot of 904 Jacksonville love in that list.
But it feels like if Florida football is ever going to be Florida football again, you have to be doing well in Duval. You have to be doing well in Tampa and Hillsborough. You have to be doing well in Lakeland and Central Florida. Like there has to be sort of re-owning some of this recruiting territory. And so some of these guys have been looking elsewhere. They seem to be giving Florida a second look. Dallas Wilson, it'll be interesting to see whether he takes that trip to Oregon for that last weekend of the year. Mm-hmm. He was also supposed to go to FSU. There was a lot of talk of him going to Florida State and going to visit Florida State. So there is the potential, maybe if he was here last week, maybe he'll be back in Gainesville this week, and maybe he'll see the Gators a third week in a row. So that's something to watch too here. And then I think we're talking about the portal, and portal's difficult when you're talking about especially offensive linemen. So Tavares Dice is somebody that to keep an eye on, especially as Auburn struggles. Maybe we can do the same thing that Auburn did to us last year. And they started picking our class clean a little bit once there was some issues that we were showing. Auburn's had plenty of issues this year. They continue to have some issues. You never know. Maybe we could return the favor on a few of these kids like Dice and Autry.
Yeah, and it's funny, Billy Napier, like I said, the soundbite that I play, everybody wants to tell me wins, losses don't matter. Well, it mattered last year for Florida. It looks like it's mattering a little bit this year for Auburn and Florida State. I mean, it looks like, some of these targets that Florida's getting in on now, you can't tell me it's not because those two schools are struggling in the win-loss column right now. It has a huge part to do with it. Yeah, Man, that word has been so allergic in the last few years. So hopefully momentum is not as allergic anymore. Maybe the reaction is not so bad. All right, plenty of recruiting talk right there to get you caught up on the latest happenings in that aspect of the Gators program. I am David Waters, host of Gators Breakdown. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thank you for joining me on this episode of Gators Breakdown.